Hi, my name's Richard.
I'm Rachel.
Welcome to Aspirations Dance video lessons. While the techniques that we're going to discuss in these videos will work for any level of dancer, we are going to be primarily looking at the casual dancer, the kind of person who isn't really interested in the pressures of competition work, but just really wants to get onto the dance floor and experience the fun and enjoyment of partner dancing. So let's get things started. Okay, let's take a look at the very basic turn of the rock and roll. So from our hold, starting with the back step, because that's going to initiate all of our basic moves, we're going to get ourselves set. And a back step. So from here, leads, you're going to be raising your hand up to let your partner know that the turn is being initiated, and you're also going to give a little gentle push with the hand on the back. Now, as we continue to dance our 1-2 of the basic step, follows what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going through the door underneath, turning away from your partner, taking your 2 steps. So leads, what we're looking to do is we're going to try to help our partner with that. So it'll look something like this. 1, 2. And we see that the follow has moved away from us, not quite at arm's length, we still have a relaxed position here, but the follow has started to move along the floor. Now, here we're going to activate another back step. This is really important. This is the one that often gets missed out. So as the follows try to bring themselves back in sometimes, or maybe the lead is a little bit too keen to bring the follow back together again. But this is what's going to give us, when we look into our more advanced techniques, this lovely stretch and release as we come back into position. So as we dance our back step, it would go a back step. Now that's the same step there for the follow, although we're taking it from a different position now, you are still doing the back and step in position. Now that's going to allow the follow now to start moving back towards partner, and leads, what you're going to do with this hand here is you're going to take it in between you and your partner to initiate that lead. And the way I describe this, and I do apologize to the follows, if you imagine you are stirring a big pot, that's going to be the lead to bring your partner back into position. So follows, as you're dancing your 2 steps, leads, you're dancing your 2 steps from the basic step, what we would get is this, a 1, 2, and now we return back to position. So there are a lot of things going on within that we need to make sure that we're aware of. So we'll show you the turn without stopping so you can see how it looks, and then we'll talk about some of the subtleties within that are going to enhance and make your turns work well every single time. So here it goes. Back step, 1, 2, back step, 1, 2. Now from a leads perspective, as well as that little push, if we can try to feel like we are rotating our partner away, so we're trying to roll our partner off the hand, that's going to make for a better lead overall. And also making sure we're not too tight here. This is nice and loose, this position here. Not too loose that we're going to lose it, but loose enough that it's not turning into some kind of martial arts move. It remains a dance. Now as we bring partner back in here, the back step, note I haven't activated the lead here, but now I activate the lead and that creates the rotation. From the follows perspective, you're waiting to see when the lead activates the rotation for you and activates the rotation back in. So rather than throwing yourself out there and back in, wait to see what your lead is asking you to do and try to respond to that. Now, one of the things that you can find from a leads perspective as we start to coordinate hands and feet is you can lose a little bit of the coordination of the feet very early on. My advice to you there is to focus on what's happening up here so that you can give your follow good information rather than what's happening down here. The feet actually are the least important part of the dance. They're kind of going to look after themselves and do what they need to do eventually anyway. So when we look at what happens in that situation, let's say I find myself in a position where I'm getting a little bit panicky and I don't know what to do, or I can't remember, usually because we're trying to remember sequences rather than letting things just happen. You see there, I let the feet stay where they are, so I didn't get myself into a situation where I started to affect and interact too much with my follow that makes their job more difficult. Rachel, is there anything you would like to add at this point to the turn from the follow's perspective?
Yeah, make sure you wait until your leader asks you to turn. We don't want to be throwing ourselves out and back in. Make sure you go along with the lead timing. You don't want to be racing off out and back in while they're still playing catch up. Also, make sure that your turn follows circular momentum. So what I mean by that is keeping the rotation nice and tight rather than travelling it far away from your partner. So you've got your back step, 1, 2, I've done a strong amount of rotation, which then gives me plenty of room to go into the back step that follows. Whereas if you've travelled your turn and you're trying to do your back step, sometimes it can be very, very hard to get the heel down to get good weight transfer without breaking that connection there. Now if we come back in and do that again, so as you're going into the turn, you've landed the 1, 2, rather than stopping that circular momentum and stepping straight back away from one another, try and keep it going a little bit further so your back step actually rotates. You've got that shoulder pulling back there. It's not an artificial movement, which is what I'm essentially creating at the moment. It's a continuation of the turn into the back step, and then you can spring back in with all of that energy to follow.
And that's really great information because energy is what creates the dance. So initially when you first start off, you're likely to be creating something that is just kind of walking out into position and then walking back into position. But as we progress on and we start to use that rotational momentum as well as the linear momentum heading out and these great connections, what we start to see is something that moves and springs back into position. And we can start to use that to generate some of the great spacings of the rock and roll, which we will talk about. But maybe don't worry too much about those things in the early stages. It's important to try to just work on the connection work of moving in and out first of all, because from there you can develop all the other work, of course. Let's get our foundations in place before we start focusing too hard and too heavy into some of the other bits and pieces. So the initial thing is to work on the good rotation, good connection and lead, make sure the lead is generating the rotation back in. And finally, try not to grab for each other when you get back in here. It's easily done. When you first start out, you can find yourself creating the move, turning out, turning back in, and immediately grabbing for each other and kind of getting in each other's way. So if that's happening to you, don't worry about it. It's kind of where we all start. Eventually, over time, what you'll find is you'll get into a situation where you'll start to move away from each other, and now we can spring back in as we create our basic movement. And that gives us that lovely concertina style effect of the rock and roll where it moves out and in as you start to progress with your dance. So once we've got the hang of that bass turn with the connection, we can now start to look at what happens when we remove the connection and how the interactions might change. So in this particular instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hand away before applying the turn. Now this is where the importance of this light loose connection comes into it, because if we're gripping hold of each other, it becomes really difficult to try and get that hand out. Follows especially, if you're gripping your partner's hand, we don't have access to some of these moves. If it's nice and relaxed like this, pop, look at that, nice and easy. Just in case you missed it, pop, easy peasy. I don't need to really worry and work hard at that. So if I want to create a turn where I'm not using this hand and raising it up, I can release it down low, a back step, 1, 2. Now what's happened here, as Rachel's turned, Rachel's kind of kept her hand out in position so that we can connect up almost immediately without there being too much loss of connection. And we're in what's technically known as handshake hold here, we're shaking hands. So we see that again, you can see that as that's being released here, as Rachel turns out, it stays in position and my hand is already there. So if I'm doing that nice follow through there, we're already connected and we're ready to go. So we don't need to be fumbling around for hands. So if you are having a go at this and you're finding yourself getting into a situation where the hand is dropping down by the side and you're looking for it, well then all you need to do is keep those hands up and you've now got that connection work here. Now it's following all the same rules. However, on the return, whilst it is possible to do different things with this, we're going to look at how we're going to create our initial interaction with the right hand hold like this. And the way to do that is after you've created that back step and your partner starts to move back in, if you imagine that this is like a little frisbee, and as your partner moves, very gently launch it. Now, it's really important that we understand how a frisbee is thrown. If you're unfamiliar with the concept, go out and buy one and have a little go, because as I do this over time, I've seen people throwing their frisbees in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. If you're an extreme sports frisbee thrower, we're not trying to launch it through the wall. We're just trying to very gently create that moment. We'll do it from a different angle so you can see. I'm taking the hand and I'm very gently moving it and releasing it, and that's what's going to create that rotation there for Rachel as she goes into position. So as Rachel is moving towards me, I create the rotation, release, and we get that nice moment. Now, what you can find from time to time as well is that if we've got a grip here and your partner or the follower's not keen on letting go, then as we try to do that, we're left with no choice but to loop it over. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a valid move. Although at the early stages, what we end up with is a situation where we have to do quick hand switches to try to get back into position. And that's one of the things to try to avoid when you're starting out. So when we do this without the quick hand switch, what we find is that nice rotation out, nice rotation back in, and we now have access to that right hand hold. So from the perspective of the previous turn, what we're looking at there is maintaining connection here, so we can maintain connection back in. And then with the other turn, we look at the release of connection here and the release of connection here. So when we look at what's happening with the hand, the left hand's working up here and it's maintaining connection. The right hand's working down here and it's not connecting, we're releasing. So we're keeping everything down here. So that's going to give you good foundational work for some of the connection work that we can play around with. And when we start to break the rules, we can see what we can do with all of that. And when we look at the addition of new moves within all of that, if we keep this base work, and here's your practice leads. Take your left hand up and your right hand down. Spend all day just doing this until you get used to that, and now you'll know which hand is going to do the work on which plane where we're currently at right now. It doesn't matter though if we mix and match these things. So let's say I send Rachel out here and I I choose, because everything's a choice, I choose to connect this hand here, then on the return I would just bring her back in. It's absolutely fine. What I would want to avoid at this stage is trying to do my frisbee throw across the body with that left hand, because that's going to get a little bit awkward. It doesn't create a great lead for your follow. So that gives you access to the turns, whether it's using the left hand or whether you want to release and use the right hand. So take that, have some fun with it, and enjoy yourself. So Rachel, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yes, if we just dance through the initial part of the turn and stop, so back step 1, 2, and then at this point, followers, be very, very careful that you don't go reaching for your lead hand. Don't panic that you're not connected. Leave this right arm out in front of you and the lead can take hold with whichever hand they choose. Don't go aiming for the other hand, assuming they've got it wrong. Just leave the right hand out in front. Also, after you've done the back step, make sure you've got a little bit of tension in this right arm here, so your lead can rotate you back through. If this arm's like spaghetti, so very, very floppy, nothing's going to happen. Whereas if you've got that little bit of tension there, your lead can move you into position.
And what you see there is it's the lead's responsibility to create the rotation. So it doesn't have to come from the follow. So followers, you don't have to remember to turn. In fact, why would you want that responsibility? Leave it to your lead. All you have to do is just enjoy the dance. So when that happens, into position Rachel goes, so Rachel doesn't have to try and work that out. And that's something we explore quite deeply when we start looking at some of the other turns and other moves and figures in our rock and roll. The other thing that Rachel was talking about there, the grabbing for hands, and I've seen people in that situation when they've been dancing, the lead has turned the follow out and has again chosen to catch with this hand, and I've seen the follow lean forwards, slap that hand out of the way and grab for the other hand. Follows is not your responsibility. So as Rachel said earlier on then, keep your hand out there, the lead will interact with that, and then the lead will work out what it is they're going to want to do. So let's take a little look at that turn again, and you can see there how Rachel isn't trying to work out which hand I'm going to collect with. I'm taking her out, and again, it wouldn't matter if I decided that I wanted to catch with this hand and bring her back in that way. I can activate the start in the same way and bring the end of the left hand turn into it. So we can choose how we want to do that as a lead. So let's take a look at how we get those turns into our dance. One of the things to remember here is that the dance is going to be choice driven by the lead. So the lead is going to decide when to do that. And it's really important to understand that distinction, because a lot of times when you're learning things like this, you can go down the routine-based way of learning where you remember something, you write it down. And of course you can do that if that's how you prefer to work with your dancing. That's great. One of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of that is because when you have two people remembering a sequence of events and one person forgets, then we start to have problems where we get the disconnect through the dance, and it can sometimes turn into what's technically known as a row. And of course we don't want to be shouting at each other on the dance floor. We want to be having fun and enjoying ourselves. So when we look at the choice here from the lead's perspective, we're going to decide when or even if we're going to put the turn in. So if we're happy and we understand it, then as we're dancing our basic steps here and we feel like we're working together, we're thinking, yeah, this is great, I'm ready to apply a turn, well then when I'm ready I will apply the turn that I think will work for me. And again, we can mix and match the turns as we've said. Now we also want to check in the early stages that our partner's ready to do that, so we don't want to just be forcing our partner to create a turn. It is a partnership after all, so the easy check there is to ask your partner, so communicate with each other. So I can say, hey Rachel, are you ready to do the turns?
Yes.
Yeah, so Rachel's ready to do the turn, and away we go. Now at this point then, again, I'm having a dance, and when I feel like I'm ready to do the turn, out Rachel goes, and I bring her back in again, and we can carry on dancing. Now it might be that you ask your partner early on and say, would you like to do some turns?
No.
So now Rachel's not really ready to do the turn. I don't want to argue that. I don't want to be saying, no, but I don't have to do anything. I'll just stand there. It's going to be easy. No, we're going to respect our partner's decision. And also, in reverse, follows if we're having a dance and your partner decides they don't want to turn, then it's not your responsibility to throw yourself out there and launch yourself around. Again, we have that disconnect if that happens. So once we start working well together, we can apply a turn at any point and it should work out and we should have a great time together on the dance floor. So take that information away, practice, have fun with it. Don't worry if it doesn't work out well. We don't call them mistakes, we call them variations. So just remember the objectives, have fun on the dance floor while the music's playing, but whilst also working together as a team. And you're going to have a fabulous time, especially with this dance. It's one of our favourites. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that. Do all the usual stuff. Give us feedback, like, subscribe, call us in the wee small hours with all your problems. If it's important to you, it's important to us. We just want to make sure you're having a great time out there on the dance floor.